Let's talk about an invisible link, one that connects the animals on our farms directly to our own health. It's a disease called brucellosis, and it's a global threat that honestly, most of us have never even heard of. So let's figure out why it's so important.
So think about this for a second. What could possibly connect the health of a herd of cattle to a strange, lingering fever in a person that doctors just can't seem to figure out? Well, the answer is brucellosis. And understanding that connection is exactly what we're going to do today.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll break down what this hidden threat actually is. Then, we'll track how it spreads and look at the very different ways it impacts animals and humans. After that, we'll get into diagnosis and treatment, and finally, and this is the big one, we'll talk about the part we all play in preventing it.
All right, let's jump right in. Section 1. What exactly are we dealing with when we talk about this hidden threat?
So, at its very core, brucellosis is an infection caused by a family of bacteria known as Brucella. Now, the most important thing to get is that this isn't some 24-hour bug. It's chronic, meaning it can stick around for a long, long time. And it's what's known as a zoonotic disease, which is just the scientific way of saying it can jump from animals to people.
So why should we care? Well, brucellosis is really a triple threat. For one, because it's zoonotic, it's a direct danger to our health. 2, it's an economic disaster for farmers, causing massive financial losses in livestock. And 3, for any person who gets it, it can mean a really debilitating long-term illness. And to top it all off, it is incredibly stubborn and hard to get rid of, making it a persistent global problem. Okay, so we've covered the what and the why. Now let's get into the how. How does this bacteria actually manage to make that leap from an animal to a person?
You can think of the Brucella bacteria like a family with different relatives, and each one has its preferred animal host. You've got Brucella abortus that mainly goes for cattle, suis, which targets pigs, and canis in dogs. But the one we really need to focus on is Brucella melitensis. It primarily hangs out in sheep and goats, and it is by far the most dangerous one for humans. That's because it's a master of disguise, really good at hiding inside our own immune cells, which makes it a much tougher enemy for our bodies to defeat.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because the way it spreads is completely different. In a herd of animals, it's mainly passed around through contact with infected birth materials, placentas, that kind of thing. But for humans, the #1 route of infection is totally different. It's consuming unpasteurized dairy. We're talking raw milk or fresh cheeses made from an infected animal's milk. Of course, direct contact with sick animals, or even just breathing in the bacteria in the air at a slaughterhouse, those are also huge risks.
And this brings us to the people who are right on the front lines. It's probably no surprise who is most at risk here. It's the folks who work hands-on with animals and their products every single day. Vets, farmers, dairy workers, people in slaughterhouses, and even the staff in labs who handle the samples. Their jobs put them right in harm's way.
So we know how it spreads, but what does getting sick with brucellosis actually look like? Well, this is where the story splits in two, because it's like a tale of two completely different diseases for animals and for humans. And you can really see that contrast right here. In animals, the disease is an absolute catastrophe for reproduction. It causes late-term abortions, infertility, a drop in milk. It hits everything that makes farming work. In humans, though, the signs are way more subtle. It often masquerades as a nasty flu that just won't quit. You get a fever that comes and goes, what they call an undulating fever, plus drenching night sweats, constant fatigue, and aches all over. This vague, chronic nature is exactly why it's so difficult to diagnose.
And if that flu isn't caught and treated, the results can be really, really serious for people. The bacteria can travel to the lining of the heart, infect the nervous system, or even settle into bones and joints, causing chronic pain and infections. So getting that early diagnosis it's absolutely vital.
Which leads us straight to our next section. How do we actually identify and manage this thing? And you guessed it, the approach is, again, drastically different depending on whether you're a cow or a person.
And this slide lays out the harsh reality. For humans, there's good news. We can treat it. It takes a long course of at least 2 different antibiotics, but it works. Using that combination attacks the bacteria from multiple angles, which makes it much less likely to develop resistance. But for animals, the story is tragic. There is no recommended treatment. Because they can remain carriers and keep spreading the disease, the standard policy in a lot of places is test and slaughter. An infection that's manageable in people is a death sentence for livestock.
So, with the reality as stark as that, prevention becomes everything. It's the only real way forward. So how can we break that chain of infection? Well, this is where we all have a role to play.
The strategy has a bunch of layers. It all starts on the farm with vaccinating the animals. For the rest of us, the single most important thing you can do is avoid drinking raw milk or eating unpasteurized dairy products. Period. For people in those high-risk jobs, protective clothing is non-negotiable. And then there's the big picture stuff, like strict quarantine rules and proper biosecurity to contain any outbreaks.
And this quote really just hits the nail on the head. Brucellosis is a major concern because of that perfect storm. It causes devastating economic losses, it has a serious impact on public health, and it is just plain difficult to get rid of. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought. Brucellosis is such a powerful reminder of how deeply connected animal health and human health really are. And as our world gets smaller and more interconnected every single day, it really makes you wonder, what is the next invisible link? What's the next hidden threat that we all need to be watching out for?